Why don't we have a few more minutes when we have our four panelists go up to the desk up there. Just go to audience Q and A and get through as much as we possibly can.
What's the new drug of choice for allergies? No?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
What's the new drug of choice for allergies?
Well, the unfortunate thing with Claritin as a drug, loratadine works. The problem is it's been outsourced to Latin America and China. Therefore, the quality control is not there. And this is stuff that we absolutely know. So you may be getting 1 milligram of loratadine instead of 10 milligrams. You may be getting 3. There is absolutely no quality control. When it got outsourced, I was hearing from my patients, gosh, Claritin's not working for me anymore. Can you give me something else? And that's exactly why it wasn't working. It's because the quality control was not there.
This question is for Dr. I'm sorry, I forget your last name, sir. Doctor, right. How can you be sure that the correlations you were showing, that you didn't leave something out that might be the correlation between cause and effect?
Like salt ingestion.
Yeah, I think these are always questions we have with observational data like epidemiology. We considered things like smoking and occupational histories, but the question was raised about water hardness. What about salt? But I mean, I think what's been impressive is this is not only in this study, but it's in hundreds of studies around the world that we've been able to show this with different salt intakes, different smoking habits.
But it's the weakness of the science we do that, and I think what's been what we would want to do is experimental studies where we change air pollution and see how people respond. And so that's actually where I've focused a lot of my attention recently. That's we can't do this, but in fact there are places where air pollution has been controlled. Can we see the benefits of that? That was the study I presented here. What's happened in the United States now that we have cleaned up the air? We've made the predictions based on, the air quality we've had in the past. Can we see the benefits now? It seems to be showing up. We have other examples where that's being done.
Why don't we just go across the room from this direction? I'll just go ahead. I'll just start. Ma'am.
Hi. I'm actually currently getting a master's in public health, so I've recently learned of some studies. I guess this is directed to the people who spoke about immunosuppression.
Could you speak a bit louder?
I'm sorry. So I guess this is directed to the people who spoke about asthma and allergies. And as of studying public health, getting my master's at UNH now, I've learned of some studies that are talking about a lack of contact with helmets being a problem. And I'm not trying to argue with all of the things you presented today. I think they are very legitimate arguments, and I agree with most of what everybody said. I guess because of a lack of helmets, people can't develop certain immune responses, so your body attacks itself, can cause Crohn's disease and allergies and asthma. What are your comments on those? Obviously, I understand that pollution is a huge problem and does cause I have asthma myself, so I understand that is a huge problem for myself. Pollution definitely triggers asthma response. But does anybody have any comments on what maybe the relation with helmets could be with respect to asthma and allergies increasing, since there is a lot of desensitizing to those types of things, and too much sterilization and disinfection at home? I don't know if anybody's able to answer.
Well, I think you're talking the hygiene hypothesis. Okay, I'm not sure I heard the word. Did you say helmets?
Helmet.
Oh, helmet. That's what I was hoping you were saying. I wasn't sure where helmets were coming in. Clearly, if you go back tens and hundreds and millions of years in the development of Homo sapien, you'll find that helmets were the #1 cause of death in those ages. So the immune system called the type 2 immune system, or Th2 immune system, was really the primary immune system to protect against those types of infections.
We have also a Th1 type of immune system which protects us against viruses. It's part of the innate immune system, and that has become a little bit more robust compared to the Th2 system. And the hygiene hypothesis, which is not really panned out to be completely correct, promulgated that if you get a lot of bacterial infections in your system and are able to survive that, you invigorate the Th1 system to predominate over the Th2 system. That's actually not been completely shown to be correct in subsequent studies. The initial studies out of Germany looking at children who work on dairy farms is where a lot of this research initially came from, so that they were getting the good bacteria, like we take the probiotics when we're taking antibiotics. There's some accuracy to it, but it's more complicated than just that.
Yes, Dr. Wynn, 2010 was the hottest year on record, or since records have been kept. New Hampshire is tied with Rhode Island for having the distinction of the hottest year on record. In your practice, can you draw a link between this level of heat and your clinical practice? In other words, are more people coming in because of these gradually rising temperatures?
No, because I haven't looked for it. I have a very busy and active practice, and it's busy at all times of the year. I do feel, though, that there is gestalt I can make about allergies in general.
I feel that people who have claimed never to have had allergies or who have had only minor symptoms of allergies are complaining of many more symptoms now and are more severely affected than they had been in years past. The data that I showed you from Quest Laboratories talks about a marching of the allergies, going from childhood when you're allergic to foods to then older when you're allergic to aeroallergens, and then going on to develop asthma. And I think that's a phenomenon that we do see.
May I suggest that another possible source of information would be to check with veterinarians? Yesterday, our cat was diagnosed with a bad case of hookworm parasites. And the vet said that he had seen a few cases of this in dogs who had come up from the south, but it was extremely rare to see it in cats. And I just wondered, like, what would veterinarians have seen, say, 10 years ago, or what might they see 10 years from now? Would this be another sign of diseases that were common, say, in the south that are now suddenly starting to be more common up north?
Well, I mean, a good example of that where we live is ticks with Lyme disease. I mean, the spread of parasitic diseases that were once more limited is yet another way in which society is going to have a cost that should be thought about when we think about setting regulations. I actually have a friend, Elizabeth Bartone Johnson, who does that kind of work where they look at the health of the cats and try to infer implications for the humans. So you are right on track, and that's a very interesting way to study.
Sir.
Hi. I think one of the issues that boils down to is airborne industrial contaminants that were produced by large-scale energy systems. In the Northeast, what are the issues surrounding small, distributed, and decentralized biomass systems that produce energy? Would that lower or alleviate, or I should say, what are your opinions of that? We all need energy. Where are we going to get it? It could be the key in the net effect of the pollution coming from.
Biomass.
Yeah, has sort of been, well, the state of Massachusetts, led by Deval Patrick, made a big push for biomass as a source of renewable energy, which is now being backpedaled.
Excuse me, I failed to mention. This would be distributed and decentralized energy, biomass versus the large systems. I'm sorry.
Fair enough, yes. Yes.
I know that study. Yes.
Right. So, yeah, I was going to refer to the Merrimack Valley study that looked at the emissions. So the emissions levels with biomass that are problematic to a person like myself who looks at families who are affected by asthma is really the particulate matter. And even in the smaller scale systems, the particulate matter levels are incredibly high. And if you look at countries that have, you know, for example, Bogota, Colombia, or Colombia, where there's a lot of wood stoves, Chile as well, those particulate levels are extremely high relating to sort of wood stoves, and there are a lot of health impacts from that. So even, so let me back up and say that it's not necessarily the answer, biomass, because even with biomass, there are emissions that come with that kind of a fuel source. Most problematic is the particulate matter. So it's an area that really has to, I think, be thought about very critically before anyone pursues biomass as an option.
There's no indication that biomass intrinsically is safer in any sense. In fact, in many cases, the particles, the emissions are more toxic than the emissions from the big power plants, which have controls on them. So, you know, this concept of small biomass facilities distributed, you know, I think really is not a good idea.
I think the major health effect with biomass, it was brought up a little bit, it really is cooking stoves. And if you look at third world, that's where a major cause of CO2 production and global warming is coming from, the millions to billions of people that are using cooking stoves. And there have been solutions that have been suggested and looked at. Unfortunately, come from a misconceived concept of trying to impose Western culture onto the developing nations. In Africa, they had a huge project with solar energy producing cooking stoves, but they didn't take into effect the fact that the African behavior was to have the men go out during the heat and doing the hunting, and the women at night cooking the meal, and the stoves were not effective in that at all.
I want to take issue with you. I actually was at a meeting 2 weeks ago, an international meeting on indoor air pollution, and this issue of cooking stoves, and there's been huge improvements here in the technologies, and going into these countries actually and using carbon credits, in fact, using the carbon market to install high-efficiency, low-tech stoves into these communities, and dealing with the issues actually of gathering wood of women, not only the direct emissions, but also the violence that women are put to as they have to go out and gather wood, for example, and putting them at risk. These technology has actually been remarkably efficient, and last year there were 2.8 million stoves installed around the world.
Those are propane stoves?
No, these are biomass burning stoves, high efficiency, which get around the problem of the emissions here, and also improve the ability to burn more efficiently without having to gather so much biomass. So it's really become a major initiative for the Gates Foundation. It's the #1 priority for the Department of State. The Secretary Clinton actually came to our meeting and made a presentation about that. I think that's great.
That was the one that Bill Martin was,
yeah. Right.
Let's keep going.
Just as a follow-up to the biomass in the Northeast, it's not part of the health issue, but what could be a solution for energy production? As Americans, we don't think we're going to be serving more, we'll probably be using more. So just generally, what does the panel have to say about what the future is for our Northeast energy?
At the Unit of Concerned Scientists, we have a lot of fantastic energy experts who would love to dig into that further. But just to give a sense, I don't underestimate energy efficiency. We really actually don't have to be increasing our energy consumption by any means. There is actually huge efficiency benefits and potential, and in fact, much more than many of us have ever realized. Plus, the return on investment is very high. So there are, there's numerous programs. New Hampshire, I'm sure, has programs for energy efficiency and retrofitting buildings, and So I think that is the #1 source of energy we're going to be looking to. And then in terms of new sources and in terms of converting, we really do need to look to cleaner sources of energy. A renewable electricity standard, which you heard the Congressman Bath say he does actually endorse that. That has a lot of bipartisan support in Congress. And certainly in the Northeast, many states have renewable electricity standards to start moving our electricity sources to renewable sources that don't have the pollution implications of the fossil fuel sources. So I think that's extremely important. Transit is extremely important. There are a lot of new rules going forward to actually start requiring Detroit to create more efficient vehicles for all of us. I don't know about you guys, but we have a wonderful clean vehicles program at Union of Concerned Scientists, where we have done a petition drive for the last, I think it's 8 years, to try to get a hybrid minivan.
Yes.
Which you can in the United States, which you can get. You can buy them in Japan, you can buy them in China, you can buy them in Europe, but you can't buy them here. And it's actually, our favorite, the Toyota Prius, the Toyota, the Sienna is what a lot of people in the United States buy. We buy a Sienna. All I want is a hybrid Sienna. I would love that. And they sell them in many countries all over the world, and you can't buy it here. And you know why? Because they say that we're not willing to pay for it. And meanwhile, if you've tried to buy a hybrid lately, what they force on you is they make you buy every upgrade. I don't know if you've tried. They make you buy the sunroof and the special stereo and the DVD and this. So it pumps up the amount that you're going to have to pay to get the hybrid. So anyway, if you're interested in getting a hybrid minivan like we are, that's one good area that you could be looking into. But these are incremental movements. In general, transit, trains.
I just want to say, technology is there. It's not an issue of technology. Bill Mamou has looked at all the technology that we have, that if we took it and put it in place, we could more than supply our energy needs using clean energy. And I just have to put a plug for UMass has the oldest wind energy lab in the country. We developed the technology here. The U.S. government didn't invest in taking that technology into practice, and instead the technology went to Europe, primarily the Scandinavian countries, because they were willing to invest. So it's an issue of getting policy to invest in those technologies.
Let's keep going through the questions, ma'am. I'll go across the room.
I really appreciate all the information that all of you have shared for putting this together. I do think that we all care, and all our neighbors care about the health impacts because we feel them. I understand what Charlie Bass says, is that may not be the argument in Washington, D.C. So to me, the critical piece is that everybody in this room that is fired up right now, has all this information, make sure that it ripples out from this room. And that could be about health impacts. And then, if everybody is doing things like writing letters to the editor, getting this word out in every way that we can is critically important. Volunteering for the Union of Concerned Sciences, for the National Wildlife Federation, all the organizations that are doing this work. If the debate really was successful, well, I guess you could, like Charlie said, was it a successful debate? Well, if a successful debate is that people are arguing for years, then it was a successful debate. But did it come to a solution? No, it didn't, because if it did, we wouldn't really be here today, probably. So we need, legislation did not happen, and for it to happen, we really need to, put this information out there, letters to the editor, tell people who will then, as constituents to, Congress, will tell them. And that's what we do have to tell them. Then let them have it be whatever debate they want it to be, but the healthcare piece matters to all of us. But I can't stress enough how important it is to take it out of the room. Take it out, sign the card. I have a sign-up sheet that if you're interested in doing a letter to the editor, it helps organizations like ours to know who's doing this, because we have to also track our progress on it. So if you have any thought that you might be willing to do a letter to the editor, write it down on there. We'll help, facilitate that process. But there's been, I bet if I went around the room right now and said, what one thing That's your letter to the editor right there. Just write about that in front. It doesn't have to cover the whole thing. So I really thank you all for being here. Thanks for allowing me to make that comment, and thanks for doing what you need to do next.
This is sir. Sir, in front. You got a question?
Anthony.
Yeah.
I was just noticing I enjoyed everyone's but nobody mentioned metals and metalloids from fossil fuels. And the World Health Organization did a study a number of years ago, and they looked at cadmium, arsenic, antimony, in particular, beryllium, and they traced the metals and metalloids all across this country, all the way to Newfoundland, in the leaf litter and in the soils. Our agriculture has been severely impacted, not just from GMOs, and I could speak for hours on genetically modified organisms and genetics, but the metals and metalloids that everyone is breathing, and that bottle of water that you're drinking, you're ingesting antimony trioxide every time you drink from a plastic container. Antimony trioxide causes all kinds of respiratory problems, as well as liver, bladder, cancers, genetic, whatever. I don't see anybody addressing the metals and metalloids. We have a coal-burning power plant right here in this state that needs to be shut down. We're being bombarded, particularly in the winter, when we have thermal inversions. The thermal inversions in New Hampshire, in the city, and even in towns like Deerfield, where I live, on some evenings, because of the coal-burning power plant, they're really horrific. And I live with a person who has COPD, who should have been dead 8 years ago. And I'm retired now, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. My life is making sure that she stays alive.
I can answer that relevant to Charlie Bass right now. As he was leaving the room, I asked him.
He's a shill.
Well, we're all welcome to our opinions, but he has a vote in Congress, and there are two matters coming up: EPA regulation of ozone and EPA tighter regulation of mercury and toxics, including some of the metals you mentioned there. And Charlie Bass has not determined how he will yet vote on. He did vote against a higher standard or a standard for.
He's going to vote with the Koch brothers.
Well, he will vote depending on how much he hears from us. This is why UCS organized this event here in New Hampshire, because by talking with these folks, by talking with the candidates and the people who represent us, and expressing our views in a respectful manner, and you can do it any way you want, but you want to get through to them, and we need to dial the volume up higher than the Koch brothers. They don't live here. We live here. We vote for these folks. And I can only testify, again, yesterday morning, a gentleman sat in the front row here and asked Mitt Romney 24 hours ago in this room what he thought about climate change, and we got an answer that was more sanguine than we thought we'd get as a result of citizen contact. Charlie Bass will be voting on ozone. He will be voting on mercury and toxics, EPA regulations. We don't know how he'll vote. Ask him.
His statement here, just listening to his opening remarks, were totally incongruous. The way he's going to vote, mark my words, are 180 degrees out.
Let's keep going around the room, try to get everyone. Yeah.
I wonder, Jim, on your email list, and I wonder if we could get the emails of the presenters, because there are some points that came up. I don't want to bother them, but for example, with Dr. Dockery, the point about air pollution versus the total effect of cancer in the United States on life expectancy. I mean, that's huge. And that's the kind of thing people will think about, and there were several other things that came up, and I just, you don't want to write a